Have you ever felt that you were falling out of love with your spouse?
Or maybe you felt like you're just not as connected anymore, and you were looking for ways to reconnect, kind of to rekindle the spark that was there in the beginning.
So today, that's going to be our topic. We're going to talk about 3 ways, or 3 tips to gaining that intimate connection again.
And falling back in love with your spouse. Okay, so number 1, I want you to think about, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I've completely fallen out of love with my spouse, 10 being I'm madly in love with my spouse. Where are you right now in your marriage? And then once you've decided where you are, ask yourself, what would a 10 look like?
I think another important question is, well, why even strive for a 10? I've had couples in sessions say, well, I'm comfortable with a 5. I don't need to go any deeper because it brings up trauma or past pains or hurt. So why even strive?
Because they know that pushing past, maybe for a particular couple, pushing past a 5 would require vulnerability and tearing down some of those walls, and that initially causes pain. It's like surgery.
Yeah, because it's easier to keep you at a arm's length.
Comfortable.
Yeah, because tearing open those wounds is sometimes very painful.
So, some of you may have had that reaction where you said, well, I'm comfortable here. I don't want to move to a 10. And if that's the case, I think it's really important to absorb what we just talked about. But if you were the other piece of the population that said, yeah, I want a 10, and right now we're at a 3, whatever that is, here's what we want you to focus on. You're not going to jump to a 10 tonight. And I think, especially for women, we romanticize and we think about what that 10 would look like, and we just want our husbands to just know exactly what we want and need and intimately connect with us on that level. And that's not going to happen overnight. But what can happen tonight is you can move from a 3 to a 4. So think about, now that you know what a 10 looks like, you've answered that question, what does a 3 or a 4, if you're a 3, what does a 4 look like? What does a 5 look like? Can I take one step closer tonight on my own, even if my spouse doesn't reciprocate yet, in moving us into that intimate connection toward a 4 or a 5? So just that one step closer to being falling back in love again.
I have several couples right now that are dealing with this issue. What's happened is that they've lived, well, at first they connected, they were soulmates, and then they kind of lived separate lives. They grew apart, they didn't reconnect with each other, and so they're living separate lives, and they really want connection, but they don't know how to achieve it, and they're afraid of taking the risks to becoming closer. So in conversation, they brought this up and said, we want connection. We talked about what a 10 looks like, where they are now. And, a simple example would be, are you, so when you sit down to read a book, are you on, the recliner and you're on the couch? So if that's where you are right now, that's your 3. Maybe a 4 could be simply sitting on the same couch.
Sure. And maybe a 5 is sitting next to each other on the same couch.
Right.
So each stage could look different.
Yeah. So
and
let's not talk about a 10 though on the couch.
and maybe they're not anywhere near thinking about, moving to a 10 this week.
Right.
But they could accomplish moving from that 3 to the 4 or 5 in terms of proximity and sitting closer. Now, for other couples, it may not be proximity. Maybe it's vulnerability in your topic of conversation.
Right.
And so maybe you start talking a little bit more vulnerably about what you want or need in the relationship. And you haven't torn down all the walls yet, but you're talking a little bit more openly about what you need to hear from your spouse.
Tip number 2, and I kind of addressed it, is get inside their world. Like what I was talking about, the people that grew apart. What happens is we live in a life that's always changing. It's always, it's a new day every day.
Yeah.
And we have new goals, we have new issues that come into our lives, new tasks, and those shape us, those mold us, those, really do change us. Every single day has an effect on us, whether we feel it or not. And it's like when you look at your child, it seems like they're pretty much staying the same, but when you look at pictures of a month ago or 2 years ago, it's like, oh my goodness, they've changed so much. And that's how it is in your marriage if you don't continually check up on each other.
Right.
We want to connect, but in order for me to connect with my wife, I need to know what's going on in her world. In order to put on empathy or to understand, what's going on in her.
So I like to think of it this way. You have a recipe for a certain meal that you like to make, and you know exactly what goes into that recipe. And it might, alter here and there. You might not have a certain ingredient on hand. Well, getting to know our spouse is the same way. They have a recipe. Get to know that recipe. And even if you don't nail it every time, there might be missing pieces certain days, but get to know who they are inside and out. And one way to do this is just by letting them know, I want to challenge myself. I want to describe your day yesterday in detail. Something as simple as that. And you start, from the moment your alarm clock went off or you missed your alarm clock and you woke up, and you start describing to them, this is what happened in your day. And then they can correct you because they know their day better than you do. And that helps you get inside their world. So now you're starting to build empathy. You're building that recipe or that map in your mind of your spouse's world. All right, number 3. Think about when you first connected with your spouse and fell in love. What were you doing back then to earn trust? What were you doing to demonstrate that you're trustworthy? And once you can think about that, fast forward to the present and think about one thing you can do today to do that same, to replicate that same dynamic of back in the day. What can you do today to earn their trust? One of the main topics that come up for us in counseling is trust, rebuilding trust, broken trust, whether it was a full-on betrayal or breach in the relationship, or simply just not being able to rely on your spouse. That comes up quite a bit, even if there wasn't the tumor in the relationship. But just, I can't trust him. I can't rely on him to be home when he said he's going to be home. He stays at work late, even if they're not suspecting an affair. They just can't trust their spouse. So think about, what can you do to demonstrate that trust and replicate that perceived trustworthiness that you did in the beginning of your relationship?
And one caveat about all this is we can't earn trust without actually addressing if there was a breach or the trauma, or so if all that you've done with some sort of breach like that is shoved it under the rug, that's not going to work. In order to build trust, you have to address those things, and then you really can build this amazing relationship.
That's what breeds this environment of falling in love.
Right.
It's, falling back in love and having that attraction. You're attracted to their looks, sure, but you're attracted to how trustworthy they are, how excited they are about your world. And you're attracted to that connection and that feeling that you have when you're with them. So if you can look at these 3 tips we gave today, it can really foster that environment of falling in love. So pick one of these 3 or all 3 of these tips to try to put into play, even if it's just a bite-sized chunk today, tonight, tomorrow, and see if it gets you one step closer toward falling back in love with your spouse. Feel free to reach out. We do have some openings for counseling right now, and we love working with couples and individuals alike. So whether it's something you want to work on jointly, or maybe like Adam mentioned earlier, if you've experienced something traumatic that doesn't allow you to trust or be vulnerable to fall back in love, and you want to work on that one-on-one, we do offer individual counseling too, and we'd love to connect with you.
God bless.
Take care.